So this is the second day of our conference, Dialogue of Continents, with the topic, De-risking the transition to a new globalization. And of course, when we talk about globalization or deglobalization, we necessarily think about connectivity, about various means of transports that make possible trade and, of course, partnerships. And the questions today is how the transition to these new globalizations will influence trade, connectivity, and strategic partnerships. Connectivity has become a defining feature of the modern economy and one of the significant trends of the 21st century. Global value chains are being reshaped in response to reshoring, friendshoring, nearshoring policies, and rising trade investment barriers. If the rewiring of worldwide connections persists and friendshoring as well as deglobalization remain long-term trends, regional economic activity might become a long-lasting trend. So do we see already some trends in the areas of connectivity, of a global rewiring of regionalization? And we may have similar questions about financial activity and perhaps at a later stage also for monetary arrangements. Before perhaps I introduce the members of the panels, I have to say that I'm replacing here Massimo De Andreis, who has been a regular participant of conferences organized by Marc Usan, who is the general manager of the SRM, that is the Study Research on Mezzogiorno in Italy. This is linked to the very important Italian Intesa banking group. Massimo De Andreis is also kind of the chief economist of that very important bank. I was asked by Marc to replace him, as I worked myself in the World Bank, at the EBRD, in the Stability Pact for Southeastern Europe, at OEC. Okay, I have been also linked to those connectivity and transport issues. Now, we have a very brilliant panel. I will take them first to my to my left is Vladislav Inozemtsev. He is a Russian economist and political scientist focusing on global economic issues, development of the knowledge economy in the West, and modernization of the third world nations, with special reference to Russia's history and current policies, which are so important to us. He founded the Center for Post-Industrial Studies in Moscow in 1996 and has been its director ever since, combining this activity with teaching at Moscow State University and the Higher School of Economics and numerous fellowships held in the US, like Johns Hopkins University, and Europe, like the DGAP in Berlin, the Institute of Human Science here in Vienna, and Warsaw Institute of Advanced Studies, among many others. Dr. Inozemtsev served as an advisor to the Commission on Modernization of the Russian Economy under President Dmitry Medvedev from 2009 to 2011 as the chief aide to Mikhail Prokhorov, presidential's bid in 2012, and as a member of Russia's Open Government in 2013-14. And Dr. Inozemtsev has left Russia after the start of the war with Ukraine in 2014, and he lives in Washington. Okay. Philipp Sweens is managing director for Hamburg Hafen und Logistik International. It's a 100% subsidiary of Hamburg Hafen und Logistik, operator of the containers terminals in Hamburg. HHLA International is responsible for the management of the international port activities, in particular the container terminal also in Odessa, Ukraine, Tallinn, Estonia, and Trieste, Italy, as well as the further international hub terminals. Next is Zeno D'Agostino. He is a president of European Ports Organization and president of the Port Network Authority of the Eastern Adriatic Sea, the port of Trieste. In April 2017, he was appointed as a chairman of Assoporti, the Association of the Italian Port Authorities. Mr. D'Agostino has significant experience in intermodal freight transport. That's a subject that will come, I think, several times today. Railway operations, international port development projects, PPPs, financial investments, logistics centers, and free zones projects. And we have also with us Ekaterina Kozyreva. She is a president of IEC International, a privately owned tech think tank providing high-value added advisory services for connectivity, infrastructure, and transportation development. IEC is involved in both freight and passenger transport projects, rail and non-rail, and has developed its own transportation modeling software, which was used for corporate strategies of key Eurasian rail freight market players, transcontainer, and for international transport. And then very important for us is Robert Lichtner. He is a coordinator of the Danube Strategy Point, the Secretariat of the EU Strategy for the Danube region, which has been based in Vienna and Bucharest since 2018. This EU SDR is a large-scale strategy for territorial cooperation and regional development. It was founded on the initiative of Austria and Romania in 2010 by the European Commission and 9 EU member states, Bulgaria, Germany, Croatia, Austria, Romania, Slovakia, Slovenia, the Czech Republic, and Hungary, 3 EU candidate countries, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Montenegro, Serbia, and 2 EU neighbors, Moldova and Ukraine. Well, now Ukraine is almost a candidate country, and adopted by the Council of the European Union in 2011. I remember myself when I worked for the Stability Pact for Southeastern Europe that this Danube region cooperation was one of the great priority of the region and of Austria in general. So from the origin of the Danube in the Black Forest in Germany to the Black Sea, the strategy that comprised 14 states with a total of 115 million inhabitants. And Dr. Lichtner works on behalf of the city of Vienna. So he is based here in Vienna. Well, so this shows to you, I mean, the quality of the panels. And I propose perhaps that we start with Zeno D'Agostino, given also his responsibility as coordinator of many ports. And Massimo De Andreis has prepared for him a number of questions, which I will read, perhaps not always extensively, because my predecessor has really sometimes written very, very long questions. But we start with the dynamics of deglobalization. And the question is, in your view, as a president of European ports, what are some of the most visible effects of deglobalization? And perhaps we might link this with the next question. The large maritime carriers like Maersk, Hapag, Lloyd, COSCO are strongly investing on vertical integration strategies by occupying many segments of the logistic chain and ordering increasingly larger ships, which, among other things, run on alternative fuels. So you see, the Andres gives you perhaps part of the answer. So deglobalization and structural changes. What is your own assessment of the situation?
Thank you. You know, I don't believe about the deglobalization. No, a lot of analysts speak about a new globalization, as it is, you know, the title of this conference, and regional globalization. No, now you have, as you said, some phenomena related to reshoring, nearshoring, backshoring, friendly shoring. We have done an analysis last year as ESPO, European Seaports Organization, and we reported that, okay, these are important phenomena, but what is really happening is what it is called the dual sourcing. Dual sourcing means that you don't leave the activity, the manufacturing activity that you have in the past, for example, in China, you leave it there, but you create some other options for productions. So you reduce your presence in the traditional nations, but you create some other options because you must manage the risk that you can have from you know, all the conflicts that are commercial conflicts, financial conflicts, and also real conflicts, as it is happening since last year. So having this kind of scenario, you know that what is the result for our sector, for the shipping, for international transport, is you know, you have a shorter supply chain. So this is something that we are dealing with. You know, I am in Trieste, we are in Italy, in the Mediterranean Sea. What you are looking is that we have more infra-Mediterranean flows than the deep sea flows, because you have some activities that are being transferred in Turkey, in Morocco, in Egypt. So we are looking that this is the new way of globalization. It means that the globalization still exists, but you have more sharing of industrial activity in some nation. As Turkey, for example, Trieste has strong relation with Turkey. We could say that we are the gateway of the 80% of Turkish goods from Turkey to Europe, and we are seeing this. So what does it mean, for example, for the development of a port? That we see that the container sector, that is the typical deep sea way to move cargo, is not so increasing, but what we see is the increasing of the RoRo traffic. RoRo is more related, for example, in the infra-Mediterranean way of shipping. So, as you know, manager of a port, we must know that this is the new trend. Another thing that we are also working in is, you know, I use a slogan for the port of Trieste. We say that the future of the port is not the port. What does it mean? It means that we must be ready, for example, for this kind of reshaping of the global supply chains. For example, we can be not only territory for investment in the infrastructure, typical port infrastructure, as terminal, as a railway station, as railways, but also we are developing a lot of logistics areas, industrial areas, free zone areas, because, you know, in this kind of world, free zones are very, very important. Because what happened during the COVID was not only the reshaping of the supply chains, so shorter supply chain than in the past, but also you have a totally revolution on the logistic approach. You know, who is a logistic, you know, analyst or a logistic expert knows very well that you have two ways of shaping your supply chain. One is the typical, you know, Fordist way, and then you have a Toyota way, no? So in the last years, before COVID, we have seen that we were working in a perfect supply chain. So you have the typical just-in-time approach, no stocks, because everything was perfect. You didn't have any kind of delay, you didn't have problem in the ports, you didn't have... And then you have seen that in the ports there were all these kind of problems. So what was the reaction of the supply chain managers was to create more stocks than in the past. But if you have more stocks of this, or raw materials, components, and also finished products, you need more spaces, and you need to have more spaces at a lower cost. So free zones are very, very important for this kind of new approach. So at the moment, you see that the supply chain in the world are managed as it was during the Fordist age. So we have huge stocks because we don't know what will be the future. And this is what we are looking, and as port managers, we must give to this carrier that you were speaking about, especially MSC, CMA, are investing a lot in the vertical integration because they need to don't have problem of delay, and they need stocks, they need warehouses, they need free zones, because today the planning of a supply chain is more and more difficult than it was before the COVID. So now the approach to the logistics is totally different. It is a push approach and not a pull approach as it was during, before the COVID age. The vertical integration is also useful for this because the shipping lines need to plan better what is happening on the land side. This could be a danger, but during the COVID, nobody, for example, the antitrust bodies all over the world did something to the oligopoly that was creating on the shipping lines. Nobody says nothing. They did what they want. They had huge profit, and nobody says nothing about this. So now they are full of money, and they can invest in what they want. They are buying everything. They are not only the shipping, not only the ports, not only the terminal, not only warehouses, not only railways company, not only everything. They're buying everything. Because during the COVID, no antitrust in the world, not only in Europe, but also in Europe, did something against this kind of phenomenon. So this is the result. So now, we work as port authority, as port manager. We have a public bodies that has to face this kind of huge player. I have a good relation. Philipp knows very well. I know very well all the shipping companies manager, but not all the ports are so strong in the relation with them. That's why, when they come to Trieste, we have done the job before and our homework. So, we bought everything outside of the port. So that's why I say the future of the port is not the port. We are not only the manager of the port. I am the president of the industrial zone because we bought the 52% of the industrial area. We manage all the inland ports that we have in an area of 100 kilometers around Trieste. So when they come, they have to face with us. So we have a good dialogue with them, but it's not the same in Italy, it's not the same in Europe, it's not the same in the world. So they have a strong financial capacity. In the last 3 years, we have done net profit more than the technological companies. If you look who has done the real profit in the last 3 years, are the shipping companies. So now they can do what they want. This is a real problem. Not only the vertical integration, but also the horizontal integration, because the problem is that, also if you think about the vertical integration, it could be something also positive. Because when you have a unique owner of a supply chain, a unique owner of a chain, you can also speak about innovation. You can also speak about green transition with a unique player. And we do it. We speak with them. For example, for the transition to the green fuel, no? You don't have to speak with a shipping company, with different terminal operator, with different intermodal companies. No, you speak with one only player, and you can arrange with them the development of the transition, for example, to green fuel. So this is positive. The problem is when you have the horizontal integration, when you see that inside your port or inside the Italian ports, the European ports, the player are only 1, 2, or 3. This is the real problem. So I'm not so against the vertical integration, but I want to have a choice. The market should have a choice, should have, okay, some vertical chains, but you must have more vertical chains, not only 1 or 2 or 3. And this is what is happening in Europe. And as I said, it is a great responsibility of the antitrust bodies that didn't do anything during the COVID age.
move now from the Mediterranean or the Adriatic, where is Trieste. Let us move inland to the Danube basin and ask Robert Lichtner to present to us what is involved now in this Danube region cooperation initiative. What are the main projects? He can talk particularly perhaps about intermodal connections, and also about the impact of, well, the Ukraine war, the geopolitical turbulence on these activities, on these projects in the Danube region. So you have the floor, Mr. Lichtner.
Thank you very much, and the microphone works. That's good. Good morning. I would start off with the title that I see on the screen, and if we speak about de-risking transition and new globalization, I think from the point of the Danube region strategy, it's the regionalization. This is the new approach, I would say, and this is exactly something that EU, what we call EU macro-regional strategies, are following. We have in the Danube, and thank you for naming all the countries, 14 countries who have, over 10 years ago, decided to work together with a very transnational approach, however, on a very regional implementation. That means that all these 14 countries, and again, in the Danube region, and you said it, having the Danube as the longest European river and the most international river in the world, actually. So we have, of course, very many small countries, but again, very many borders. But all the issues that we are dealing with, and again, no need to mention the green transition, all the transport issues that we have. We have the war in Ukraine. We have the Green Deal, digitalization, you name it. So all these issues, if we speak about the loss of biodiversity, for example, all these things do not stop at the borders. So if the Austrians do something in Austria and Hungarians don't do it, it's going to have pretty less effect. So the approach here on the macro-regional strategies level is really to work together stronger, because when we do things together, it has much more impact than when every country, every single country tries on its own, which is nothing new on the EU cooperation. What is new on the macro-regional level is that all these countries have decided to work on the issues that they have actually decided by the governance again 12 years ago. The strategy was endorsed by the Council, so it's an official EU strategy. And the implementation goes along thematic fields. So when we start, and we are talking here a lot today about connectivity, about transport, so this is clearly one of the topics. We are dealing with energy issues, we're dealing with tourism, we're dealing with education, we are dealing with innovation, we are dealing with security. So there is 12 thematic areas which every country designates experts that work together on what we call the action plan that is being then implemented in all 14 countries. What's also unique is this cooperation between EU and non-EU countries. On one hand, the EU integration is being very much pushed forward and very much supported when we have Ukraine, Moldova, Serbia, Bosnia, Montenegro, working on the same principle, on the very same level with EU countries. So when we speak, and again, the Danube region is so diverse. When you imagine we have on the western part Germany and Austria, and on the eastern part, on the lower Danube, to say that, we have Romania, Bulgaria, Moldova, Ukraine. So the issues let's say on the first look may look totally different. Of course, the socio-economic development is completely different, but the issues that we are dealing with are very, very similar. And again, if measures taken up on the upper Danube are taken and they're not taken on the lower Danube, we're not going to help each other because it's simply not going to work. So when we stay now with the connectivity and with the transport, and since the first speakers were talking about port infrastructure, so this is also one of the what we call pillars or the thematic priorities. We are, as the Danube Region Strategy, also dealing with questions and with issues and trying to support the stakeholders, trying to support the countries, the governments, because the owners of the strategy at the end of the day are the governments. What, however, is very new, that these thematic fields are coordinated on a really macro-regional level. So that means that if we talk about improving the port infrastructure and the management, it's being looked at from a global perspective. So not what Serbia needs, what Hungary needs, but really what the whole region actually needs. So there we have one of the priorities, as I said, the port infrastructure and the management. So really to look how the ports all along the Danube are set up, how to improve the conditions, the shore infrastructure, when we speak about business development, getting all the ports, the operators, the business people together. We have once a year what we call Danube Port Days. This was just 2 weeks ago in Vienna, a huge event where all the operators and all the business community has meets once a year together. The strategy also looks at fleet modernization. This is something that all along the Danube is a big issue. We have old fleet. Speaking about the Green Deal and the greening of the fleet is a big issue. We know from the operators that the costs are simply so high that new models are needing to be looked at. Also with the involvement of the public sector. The river information services, so really providing real-time information on the navigation status. This is something that's being dealt with for several years already on a really Danube-long level. Also, one issue that we see along the Danube is the question of jobs, of skilled personnel. This is something that may not look like a first priority, but if you simply do not have the skilled personnel, if you don't have the captains, if you don't have the people who operate the vessels, then you have a huge problem. And we see this also on the lower Danube, but the same in the western parts. So we are also trying to push forward the education. So really get young people, get skilled people. We have the question of digitalization. So really bringing in new skills when it comes to the operation of the vessels all along the Danube. And also the questions, again, I said it at the beginning, the most international river in the world, so clearly having many borders. And the operators know that when you come from outside Schengen, you need to stop at every border, you need to stop, you need to put all your paperwork, and this has been a huge issue hindering simply the transport along the river. So just to also give you one example how macro-regional strategies actually work in very practical terms, it's also a lot about policy change. So when you work on a very transnational level, it's not only about implementing projects, it's also when you deal with things like administrative burdens, you also need to adapt all the legislation on national levels. And this is a process that's not done in 2 weeks or 1 year. So every country all along the Danube, when we implement what we call the David forms, this was something where now when you enter Schengen from outside the Schengen area, you only stop once with your vessel. You put all your information about the passengers, about the cargo once, and then you are free to move forward. That saves a lot of time for everyone. And this was something that needed a preparation of over 4 years to have every country on the same boat, adapting their national legislation, enabling to have this new system of reporting. And again, the project itself was not a really big deal because it's a database that you fill in and provide information to everyone. So this is something that the macro-regional strategies really enable to have joint operations on a large-scale area, on a very regional level, and at the end of the day, really looking to improve the transport in these terms all along the Danube. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, now, Mr. Sweens, I would like you to talk again about logistics, since Hamburger Hafen und Logistik is a major player that runs the terminal of one of the most important ports in Northern Europe, Hamburg. But I'd like you also to talk particularly about intermodality. I understand that in Hamburg you put a lot of emphasis on rail connections. And last but not least, if you could say a few words also on the role of special economic zones and free zones, as there was recently apparently an event in Frankfurt on the relations between Italy and Germany and cooperation on such zones.
Okay. I was here 3 years ago. So Philipp Sweens, I'm the Managing Director of HHLA International. As was said earlier on, we operate a number of ports. And I was here 3 years ago. Yesterday night, I looked at what I said 3 years ago, and I realized the world has changed quite a bit since then. Some things remain as they were, and what Zeno said earlier, not just looking at the port, but looking at the networks. And I think Mr. Farrell yesterday evening also talked about networks. I think networks are absolutely critical in order to get an efficient logistic and get goods, services, and people from A to B. And the disruptions that we've seen in the past 3 years, be it COVID, be it the invasion, be it the economic crisis that we have now, we've seen the supply chains can get stuck, but I always say, like water finding its way, it finds its way to from A to B, using the least path of resistance. So that is a good thing that we've seen in the past years. Now we need to change and amend our logistics, and I think in the next years, the logistic flows could change quite a bit. I do not think, and there also again, coming back to what you said, I completely agree that globalization is still going to stay, that people are looking at redundant supply chains. That being said, there is an increasing element of political influence, I would say, which makes it for companies extremely unpredictable. It's extremely more unpredictable to plan how they are going to manage their logistics. Take the example of the war with Ukraine. I mean, and Germany. German government had a very pro-Russian stance, where giving incentives for companies to invest in Russia, and from one day to the other, it's no. Yet it's not happening anymore, and you have to leave everything behind. Same thing we are seeing now increasingly with China, with a concern about what could happen there, and politics using instruments like, for example, in Germany you have the Bundesgarantie, the guarantee that you have when you do investments abroad, which is partially being used as a political instrument. US, same thing with the Inflation Reduction Act. So it makes it, while, again, logistics is relatively easy to get goods from A to B, taking a decision now on what is my logistics of the future going to be, where is my manufacturing going to be, and for us as a port operator, I mean, we cannot just take the port, pack it together and move it somewhere else. It's there for 20 years, it's there for 30 years. And this aspect is taking will take much, much more importance, I think, in our reflections going forward. What does it mean? What could happen? What are the risks that we could face ahead? And can I would almost say, dare to do something, or am I going to face consequences which could be really life-threatening for certain companies or for certain activities? So that's a whole new set of not clearly defined and not clearly graspable rules that one has to deal with now, and which could change more logistics than deglobalization or the supply chain creating redundancies in the supply chain. That was one. Sorry, can you repeat the other two questions?
Yes, the first question was also connection with rail.
Yes.
Yes, but you had partly
And
answered.
again, rail is absolutely critical. I mean, we invested in the port of Trieste for one good reason, and Hamburg is also a very good example. I think we have the highest proportion of rail, cargo going by rail to the hinterland. Trieste is what also made us extremely interested in investing there. From an ecological sustainability point of view, which is absolutely critical nowadays in any supply chain decision. We are not yet at the point where people are willing to pay more, but we're at the point where there's going to be so much pressure to choose the most sustainable way of transporting goods that rail is the key to that. The other thing that we've seen, and then also hearing what you said, during the pandemic, trucks were stuck on the border. Look at the situation now between Poland and Ukraine. Trucks are stuck at the border. It takes 14 days to get through the border. Rail is still working. It's working a lot better than road transport. Rail, and also what is in other areas, the Danube is a good example, and waterways, inland waterways, which are not always used to the best possible, and these areas have to be further developed. Another one that is currently very big in the focus is the middle corridor. A lot of the goods going by land from China to Europe were going through Russia. That is now increasingly difficult, and there's an increased focus on the middle corridor, which is a complex corridor because it requires rail, Caspian Sea, the rail again, and then so there's multimodal transportations, but there is a big effort of the concerned countries in making this work, and it's absolutely vital for a country like Kazakhstan, for example, which is completely landlocked. It's absolutely critical to get those supply chains working and working fast, and there have been enormous progress on that. The last question was around the free zones.
Yes.
I must admit, I'm not a specialist of free zones. I think Zeno might be the better specialist of free zones. And within Europe, I'm not 100% sure. I think it makes a lot of. Trieste is a good example. We have the same thing in Tallinn. It's a good example for goods arriving from outside of Europe to have a free zone in the port area where goods can be stored before they have to go through customs declaration. Free zones in the inland, there is the corridor now between Trieste and so there are and Austria, so there are starts to that, but again there I would leave other people that are more specialists.
We will do a first train
come back
on the
to it,
international
perhaps.
corridor in these days between Trieste and Villach. Yeah.
We'll come back to that in the discussion. So congratulations, Mr. Sweens. But now I like to, I have a few questions for Mrs. Kozyreva. You are the president of an important think tank that has also worked with the World Bank, and among other things, your organization also conducts studies on logistics, including the well-known Logistics Performance Index that you have developed. My predecessor, Mr. De Andres, suggests that you talk about also the role of North Africa and its connection with the maritime shore of Europe, as in this historical moment, the ports of Morocco and Egypt are investing more and more. For example, also Tanger, Mediterranean, Damietta, Port Said. How important is it to have increasingly strong connections between the two maritime shores, also in the light of the geopolitical events that are changing the Mediterranean? Can you handle that first group of questions?
Yeah, thank you so much. I hope that you can hear me well. And maybe I will take just a couple of minutes to present myself, because I see there is kind of a bit of confusion. Indeed, I'm a president of IEC International, and this is I'm a co-founder of Infra Economy Group. We are now based in 3 countries, in France, in the Emirates, and in Kazakhstan, in Astana. So what we are doing is the research and the advisory services based on the macroeconomic forecasts and transportation modeling. Indeed, we work with the World Bank, but unfortunately we have not participated in their logistics performance index. This is purely their thing. But we have worked exactly with the medical corridor issues, and last week there was a presentation of a new report that was done by us together with the World Bank. We accompany different types of logistics activities, both for the authorities and for private investors. And now we're deeply involved in port development in Europe and much more the emerging markets. Besides, for the last 5 years, I've been working with the United Nations SCAP as a consultant for connectivity issues, everything referring to transport, sustainable transport, and regional cohesion, transport-based for the emerging markets such as Southeast Asia, North and Central Asia. And yes, we have the activities in Africa as well, also in Morocco. But if you allow me to, I would like to a little bit reframe this discussion and to turn from the Morocco markets much more to the emerging markets in general. So the key difference is what I see from our activities and our advisory projects in Europe and in emerging markets is that something that makes me think about my academia ages in the Moscow State University and later on at the Russian Academy of Science. I was working with what is called in German the Standort theories. It's about structuring everything, structuring the world. I'm a geographer. And right now it seems like the books I was reading when studying at the university, this is something that I'm making right now, and it's becoming even more and more dynamic. So coming back to Standort theories, this is about the structures that appear at the territories. The ports are the structures. It's true, they cannot be moved. But we should all consider that these structures represent something, the economic processes, the trade, that existed before. It takes a time to construct a port, to construct a railway. The payback period for the railways is 15 years. And that's already good for the railways. But after these 15 years, these structures, they are made for something that was in the past. What's the key difference between Europe and the emerging markets? The Europe sticks a lot to the regulations and the rules and applies a lot on these existing structures. I've been accompanying a large European port, and they've been seeking for new macroeconomic opportunities, asking us to make the forecast for them, to choose the segments, to see where are their opportunities. But then they tell us, okay, guys, your prospects, that's good, but we would like you to stick to the global hubs and spokes concept. That is to say, please consider that the large ports will ensure the flows between with other large ports, but we say, in this case, there are no opportunities for you. We are sorry for that. If you want to look for the new in the old structures, you will never find it. And then there are other types of the markets, the emerging markets, and especially the countries that we call the connectors. Last year, we published our vision together with Marco Zan, and it was presented at the previous edition of the Dialogue of Continents. We were talking about the restructuring of global trade and the appearance of the new types of countries, the so-called connectors, to really connect both the macroeconomic, the financial flows, the trade flows, and these are the countries like Turkey, like the United Arab Emirates. Some countries have got an opportunity to become the connectors like Kazakhstan, but this is still their choice. Whether they choose to become one or not, it will depend on their policies. And so these countries, they've got completely different strategies. Morocco, by the way, as well, is one of the possible connectors. So what they are doing is that they are creating new structures. They do no more stick to the existing ones. And yes, maybe one of the challenging things are the largest market players, the container lines that still like to stick to their structures. They don't like to create the competition within themselves and between one another. So, and this creates a gap in experience between Europe and between the emerging markets. And I'm sorry to tell that Europe doesn't win in this competition. So unless there is a new vision on how to cope with the further economic challenges, we've been, even during at our session, we've been talking the possible changes in global supply chains that may come, but they have already come. Last year, about 1/3 of international experts diverted their directions. The trade is still there, but the directions are different. So here are the changes. We are already living in these changes. So this is the issue that I might consider important. And in terms of your question, if we come back to Morocco or to Turkey or to the United Arab Emirates, well, of course, they will play a more and more important role because they are creating new links, they are creating new structures, and they consider something in the future and not stick to something that exists from the past. And that's their strength, and that's something that we should learn from them. And by the way, that is why more and more market players from the Emirates, from Saudi Arabia, from Qatar, they are coming to these new emerging markets in Africa, and they are establishing these links with one another. So they don't want to be imposed with these ancient structures. They want to create something new from nothing. And me personally, as a consultant, I see a huge potential there. And I think this is something that we should keep in mind and something we can consider.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, last but not least, Mr. Vladislav Inozemtsev, you are a great expert on international trade and the global economy. And we are in a historical period where we are observing many transformations of supply chains, redefinition of maritime trade routes, new investments to address the energy transition. So what vision can an expert such as yourself give of the future of the economy, but specifically the drivers that will shape it, also considering the strong push towards digitalization and therefore both digital and physical connections? And then there is a special question, of course, for you, given your country of origin. It's the questions of the Arctic route. That's a question many of us have. How viable will that route be in the future? Will it reshape, perhaps, completely connectivity and globalization? So we are listening.
Thank you so much. Okay, I will just start with some points which were not mentioned here.
Yes.
Because yesterday, when we spoke about connectivity, about the reshaping of globalization, it was mentioned that the distances, they are still there, even the economy changes, the distances are still there, and some of the speakers said about, as I remember, New Zealand and the United Kingdom and their trade. I would say that because we are focusing also on geopolitics, which was yesterday the main topic, I would say that the geopolitical tensions and the great power quarrels, which are so often happen these days, they change the attitudes in a way that makes the maritime trade much more secure these days. Of course, everybody knows about Ukraine and the Russian naval blockade of the routes for agricultural exports, but nevertheless, now there is a huge difference emerging between maritime trade and a continental transportation, because the land mass is now dividing the major economic regions even more effective than the sea did in some times. And I would say that it was also said about connectors, about the countries which supposed to be, bridges between between great economic powers. But what we have seen in recent years, I think, is a huge challenge for this concept in general, because Russia for years pledged to be a huge connector, because it was a lot of dreams about the Trans-Siberian Road, because the bridge between China and Europe, with millions of tons of goods moving every year during this road. But nothing of this happened, actually. Even 10 years ago, when I delivered some reports here in Vienna, I said that this is a huge myth, a huge dream about these connections via Russia, because the country is too unstable, too unpredictable, and actually the moving of goods for such a long distance during a big Eurasian continent is much, much more expensive than using maritime roads. And so what we have seen now, that Russia is now not a solution for this connection. It has a problem, because it's a problem for Ukraine, definitely, because of the blockade, because of the war. It also is a problem for Kazakhstan, for example, because, and for all other Central Asian countries, because Kazakhstan is one of the vital sources of energy goods and uranium ore and many other products for Europe, for example, because it's a country which accounts, for which European Union accounts for around half of the exports. And Russia actually can block these supplies, because till the last year, more than 90% of Kazakhstani oil passed through Russian territory in its way to Europe and to other Western markets. It's huge, and we know, everyone knows that Russia tried several times to block this Caspian oil pipeline consortium. It's with quite significant impacts to Kazakhstan. The same can be said about other Central Asian nations, like, for example, Turkmenistan, because once again, but it was 50 years before, Russia also tried to block the gas exports from Turkmenistan to Ukraine and also to Europe via the Russian territory. In 1996, less than 20 years ago, 65% of all Turkmeni natural gas, went to Ukraine. And after the Russian efforts, now 94% of Turkmenistan gas goes to China. And so, therefore, I would say that all these geopolitical tensions, or maybe I would say landmass political tensions, yeah, they are actually affecting the global economy today and the regional economies as well. And therefore, my point was that if one wants to create a solid and prospective regional economic blocks, or regionally integrated blocks, these people who are architects of these blocks, they should pay much more attention, not about the cheap access to the new markets, about the closeness to their territory, but first of all about on reliability of these markets, because Russia was very much preferred by the Europeans as a supplier of oil and gas before the Ukrainian war, and now the United States is the biggest supplier of LNG to Europe. And so in many, many other cases, it's the major element of success in the world of geopolitical tension is to find a really reliable partner. Like, for example, maybe the countries of Central Asia and Kazakhstan as a huge resource producer can be for Europe. Of course, Middle Corridor was mentioned once again. And I think it's not only one solution, there should be a lot of corridors leading through the Transcaucasian territories and maybe Iran and Turkey, of course, to Europe. So my major point is that was that we should pay special attention to the landlocked countries and to continental powers, because they can largely affect the trade, the regional and global trade these days. Because I would also point a very interesting moment when, as it was said that Kazakhstan or Turkmenistan or some other countries are landlocked, I would say Russia worked for many years to consolidate these countries. If you look on the European Economic Union, which was assembled by Mr. Putin by 2014, there is Russia and only landlocked countries around it: Belarus, Armenia, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and Kyrgyzstan. No exit to the seas. And this was actually the Russia saw its competitive advantage in providing this access to the high seas. But it never happened because Russia is not a transit country anymore. Why the Chinese should invest into Russian transit routes if you have, the close border with Finland and Estonia these days. So, and the last question of yours was?
The Arctic.
Oh, the Arctic route. Oh, it's a very interesting point because it was a lot of speculation about the perspective of the Arctic route. And around 10 years ago, my center in Moscow, we made a huge, large research for FESCO. FESCO is the Russian maritime transportation company. And actually, and we analyzed different directions of trade which could be served by the Northern Sea route. And I would say that we found out that it looks like a joke, but it is true. If you compare the expenses and the costs of shipping, we arrived to the conclusion that the only profitable route is a route which leads from, for example, Seattle in the United States, United States Western Shore, or Western Canada to Hamburg or to European ports via this northern route. It's not Shanghai, it's not Singapore, it's not Qingdao, it's just American, Western American shores to Europe, because the route through the Canal of Panama is very much longer. While if you took, for example, Chinese or Japanese or South Korean or Indonesian ports, the competition between the Arctic route and the Suez Canal is definitely in favor of Suez Canal, because I would say half of the profit, half of the revenue of the shipping company is coming not from the, taking some goods from the point number A to point number B. Most of the profit comes from reloading and loading some goods during the shipment. And around, not less than 20 out of 50 biggest seaports in the world are located alongside the way from Shanghai to, for example, to Piraeus via the Suez Canal. And the Arctic shore is absolutely empty. Even if a huge ship got a technical problem there is no way to repair it there. So Arctic route is and will remain a route predominantly not for transit from, for example, Far East to Europe. It would remain a very important route for regional trade. For example, the LNG ships which originate from Sabetna, a new LNG gas stronghold in Russia, they can go either westwards, to Rotterdam and to other European ports, or eastwards, through the Bering Strait to Asia, which actually is the case for today. So I would really doubt about any kind of transit route, either through Russia or nearby Russia, to become a real game changer in the coming decades. So the major composition of global trade routes will remain the same, except of definitely needed changes in transportation between Central Asia and Europe, because this is an alternative market for energy resources, for rare earth metals, for uranium ore, which Europe really needs. And because of the dissociation with Russia, it will definitely need to create new lines of communication, new lines of trade, and new transport corridors there.
Okay, thank you very much. But so you talked about also these links with Shanghai, China. I'll ask the other members of the panel about how they see the attitude. I mean, first of all, how successful, after all, was the Belt and Road Initiative as far as the ports that they knew are concerned, but also since the COVID, have the Chinese resumed significant new investments? I hear, for instance, that Costco is in Hamburg or is in Rotterdam, And also, I like to hear you also, Mr. D'Agostino, about how the Chinese, what are they still active in Trieste and elsewhere?
Hamburg
and Mrs.
arrived
Kozyreva.
first.
So the other panelists, if you could talk a little bit about how you see the penetration or non-penetration of China in your respective areas. In Hamburg, I mean, for instance, the Chinese are present also, and also in rail.
The Chinese have acquired recently, and that was an 18 months battle we had with the government, acquired a minority stake in one of the terminals. One of the terminals in a minority stake, where they had been the biggest customer for 40 years. Coming back to the Belt and Road.
So first of all, I mean, are they satisfied? Are you satisfied, and are they satisfied with Belt and Way initiative as far as you are concerned? And are they resuming something different?
I mean, we're satisfied. We're not part of the Belt and Road. It is a long-standing customer that has taken a share where you keep the customer interested in further developing, so it was a win-win situation for both sides. I think the Belt and Road was as much as an economic as a political aim. My hearing is that there were a lot of investments that were done which under normal circumstances might not have been the right investments to do, and there is a correction taking place now on the Chinese side, on the Belt and Road, and a little bit more focus on what really makes economic sense also, and not just political sense. That being said, and the interesting part is that Europe has started its own program, Global Gateway, which that's exactly the point, which is sorry to say a failure, because we're not capable of managing. It's good. It would be a good thing, and it is. Again, coming back to what I said earlier on, where politics are getting more and more involved in the shaping of where do you invest, what do you do, how do you progress. And Global Gateway was one of those mechanisms, but it seems, and I hope there's nobody from the EU here, it seems that we're not capable of doing it ourselves. Avoiding the mistakes that the Chinese have done, because they've done a lot of mistakes, and it's been too much a political instrument. So yeah, that would be my answer to that.
And Mr. D'Agostino, I mean, in Trieste and other Naples or other important ports of Italy and of the Mediterranean, do you see a change of attitudes of the Chinese or towards the Chinese?
But you know, if you look, for example, in Naples, the Chinese went away. We are always speaking about where the Chinese are investing, but we don't look where the Chinese are going away. For example, in Naples, they sold for $1, I think, to MSC, to Aponte, the part that they have in the container terminal. The same happened also in Duisburg, for example. The Chinese went away. So, you know, this is something that is happening. So this is business. Okay, it is strongly influenced by geopolitics, but it is always business. So if you have a container terminal, as they had in Naples, said you don't have business, they sold their share. In Trieste, for example, there were dialogue with China merchants, but you know, HHLA arrived before, and better, with a better option. So now we have HHLA and not the Chinese in Trieste. So you know, we have to consider that we are strongly influenced by geopolitics, but at the end, you have always economy and business that the reason if the Chinese are present or not in a place. What I want to stress is something that I was thinking about when she was speaking now about the role in. She spoke especially about the Mediterranean Sea, no? And I always say to Bruxelles that I have to look what is happening in the southern Europe and not only in the eastern part of the world, Middle East or Far East, because the southern Europe and Mediterranean Sea are the part where you have the most dynamic development. It is also a very important political issue because it is not only emerging markets against the leading markets, the emerging nations against the leading nation. It is democracy against dictators, okay? This is also an important issue because what I see in our sector is that a lot of people say whoever is a dictator, you see that there are more efficiency and less time between the decision and the act. What we have in Europe, for example, is the time between decision and act, 15 years, for railways or something like this. So this is a very important issue, not only geopolitics, it is political issue. So do we want to stay to see how good is Erdogan or Mohammed VI in Morocco, or do we want to do something in Europe that can say that also democracy can be efficient in the development in the infrastructure? This is the real challenge that we are trying to do in Trieste, for example. And what we do is something very revolutionary, because when you spoke about what is happening in Turkey, what is happening in Morocco, in Damietta, in Port Said, it is true that we are doing something different, but not so different. Because, there are two ways of innovation. One is the incremental innovation, I always say, when I told you that we say that the vision of our port is the future of the port is not the port, it is because the paradigm of innovation of the port, since the Ark of Noah, it is that the port is always the same thing. A port is a place on the sea, or on a lake, but on the sea, where a boat arrives and you load and unload cargo and passenger. This is. You can put all the innovation that you want, but it is always the same. It was the Phoenician with the ships, or the new ultra-innovating container ships or cruise ships, but the paradigm of innovation is always the same. What we want to do is to break this paradigm of innovation, so we can talk to tell to the world that also the democracy can be competitive in doing port activities. So the port is a place on the sea. And on the sea, you can do a lot of things. And you can create value without the presence of a ship, because the real issue is that you create value always around the presence of a ship in the port. So you have trains, intermodality, free zone, logistics, but everything is related to the presence of the ship. So we are trying to do something without the ships. It is very innovative, but when you are, for example, we didn't spoke about the connectivity of data, no? You don't need ships if you want to connect the world with data. You need cables, you need data center, you need something different. And this is a new way to be competitive in ports and be really competitive, because today the real value goes through the cables, not through the ships. And this is the way what we want to do. Philipp knows we were also trying to develop, a container terminal where on the up you have a container terminal and, underwater you have a data center, no? So this is the way where we are planning, and in this way, being disruptive with innovation, we can be competing with this kind of development of the ports, where you cannot compete because they are dictators, so they can do what they want. They don't have any kind of environmental limits, no? They can do what they want. There is a fisherman village, you destroy the fisherman village and you put a port. This is not and should not be our way to develop the port. No. They can do this, we cannot do, and I believe that it is the right way to do it, because we have democracy, we are European, we have all these kind of issues, and we cannot forget that we come from this kind of fights. And we cannot tell to the world that we look at these nations as the leading nations. We must be disruptive, we must be more innovative. This is the way that we say that democracy is better than something else. So, when we are developing, also in Trieste, when I develop the port, I always say in my mind that it is a very strong political challenge, and that it is facing not emerging nation and leading nation, it is democracy and other kind of development of a government. And so we must be innovating, because we must face this kind of challenge.
Okay, thank you very much.
One word, and less administration.
You want to object something?
It's on. Less administration.
Microphone.
It's on.
Are you sure?
Less administration, because we're killing ourselves in Europe with administration, and that's where the 15 years come around. It's not the fisherman village that we destroy. It's just the paperwork that we create.
Yeah. But Mrs. Kozyreva, you have developed your logistics performance index.
First, I'd like to say that I'm not about democracy, as I originate from
it's
Russia.
not about democracy.
Sorry for that.
But apparently the ports,
I'm about dictators.
the ports and countries of the Far East have increased their ranking. Is that true?
No, we don't rank the countries. The tool is not for ranking.
it's
for freight modeling.
Singapore,
but what
Shanghai
I would like to
are very high up.
I won't tell you anything about it because I'm not fond of ranking and I don't think we really need it. What we do is that we actually provide the opportunities to see the trade matrices under various conditions. If something happens, if there are trade wars, if there are more dictators, if there is more democracy, whatever, if there are climate changes, if everyone sticks to sustainable development goals and so on, so we can kind of construct the scenarios and see what happens with the trade matrices by commodities and see what happens with the flows allocation by the exact routes, and these routes are always multimodal. There's no competition between transport. Yeah, but maybe, if I may, as I have nothing to say on the ranking, maybe I could still comment on the previous issues. First, I know where the Chinese are. As I work globally, they are much more now in the Southeast Asia and in the new, not a new, but a growing China, Mongolia, Russian Federation corridor. And the Chinese are really deep into getting more resources from Russia, as they have an opportunity to do it. And the trade flows from Russia to China doubled last year. So they are really investing in building new routes just to take these resources and to use them. Similarly, for the Southeast Asia, like Lao PDR this year had a United Nations project for them, and I went there and I saw what was going on. It's tragic from the democratic point of view because Lao PDR gets almost nothing from that, and well, all resources, they just go to China. But on the other hand, at least they get some kind of infrastructure and some opportunities for further development, and as they are landlocked, least developed countries, so it's important for them. So this is where the Chinese are. They are no more interested in Europe and participating in all these conflicts and coping with these barriers, because when everyone is looking at what is going on in Russia and the Ukraine, they can just calmly do what they like to do in other regions of the world. And that is why they just don't take too much time in negotiating in Europe. That's the point. But it doesn't mean that they are not interested. Okay. And coming back to another issue, it's the ports development. It is, well, we need to note that and the efficiency of maritime transportation. Maritime transportation by itself, it's quite efficient. But the share of the purely maritime route in the transportation costs for delivering, I don't know, a container from one port to another port is rarely more than 70%, and usually much less. Usually much less for the largest port. The larger is the port, the less is the share of this maritime price. So I fully agree that the development of the ports, the hinterlands, the connections, new structures around the port by themselves is a very important issue. And it's much more important than the increase in the efficiency of the maritime routes, the vessels and whatever. So I would like to fully support as an advisor this idea of developing the ports, as the crowing poles, as the connectors, and so on, so on. Okay. So, but coming back to the ranking, this will define the effectiveness and the efficiency of the overall multimodal operations. It's not enough to calculate whether it costs more or less to, I don't know, to deliver a container from Hamburg to Shanghai. Because we need to understand where this container goes further and whether there are these connections available. That is not an issue, neither for Hamburg, neither for Shanghai. But if we take, I don't know, Lagos somewhere in Nigeria, or if we take some other African countries, even in Morocco, if we take Northern Africa, is there enough connectivity for this cargo to follow after the port? The global trade is not limited with the ports, and I fully support the development of everything that is around and in between.
Okay. Now, I don't know, Mr. Lichtner, would you like to add anything? Are the Chinese strong in the Danube region? I know it was a great disappointment in Montenegro, but elsewhere?
Well, in the Danube region, I would return maybe back to this geopolitical shift that we are that we spoke before, and then connect it maybe with the question of China. I mean, and I totally agree with you what you said on this question of democracy and of the EU values. That this is something that Europe and European countries just must obey to, and this is not a discussion point. And I think this is something that should be repeated all over and all over, because especially again with the war on Ukraine, we have such a big disruption. And in the Danube region, as I said, we have not only now Ukraine being accession country and the Republic of Moldova, we also have the Western Balkan countries. And this process that on the European level has taken way too long is now, and we also see it in the Danube region, there is a new shift, there is a new momentum that we also see in political discussions. Again, it has taken a way too long time on the Balkan countries, and connecting that maybe to the question of China. I mean, we had this discussion of Chinese companies being very, very active in the Balkan. We have the discussion with Russia having a lot of influence still in Southeastern Europe. And myself being an optimist, I think the only way is the EU enlargement. It's really to push this and really to get the countries on board. And again, the Western Balkan countries should ASAP, we are discussing now 2030, it should have happened much sooner. But again, also for the economic situation, it is very important to have the European Union enlarged and have these countries part of the Union. And with Ukraine, we had this experience in the Danube region strategy when the war started. And just to give you a little anecdote, when Ukraine took over the presidency, we have these rotating presidencies like you have in EU Council. Same thing in the Danube region. So we had end of 21, Ukraine took over the presidency as the first ever non-EU country taking over the lead over the 14 countries. And we saw this real enthusiasm from the Ukrainian side. And then in February, the war broke on Ukraine, and everything basically stopped, and they had to resign from the presidency. And no one ever would believe that they come back. And it was just 2 months later, when you know this first wave was over, that Ukraine actually returned and they resumed the presidency. And we had meeting with ministers in Ukraine, of course everything online. And while there were attacks, while Kiev was under attack, they were doing and they were discussing, they were proposing stuff, and we were just working together, which was something really, really new, and also for everyone in the region, something that we haven't had for a very long time. So to return back to also this geopolitical approach, I think the EU enlargement is definitely a very big priority that we should follow in Southeastern Europe. And again, the democratic values, how we invest, how we enlarge, and how we work in this region. This is something that should, again, be definitely put out of any questions, because, as you said, you can do it quicker and invest money and then bail out, and then you're done. But the question is, do we want this as Europe, as European Union? And I actually very much liked your sentence, the sort of democracy through innovation. This is something that is a very, very nice motto, really, to work on the democracy, support the democracy, and to think about new ways on how to innovate ourselves and our systems.
Okay. I don't know, do you give us 5 minutes so to give a chance? Yes, I see here Franz Noschnik. You have the first question, and then there is a question behind. So you give your questions, and then the gentleman will also speak. Wait for the mic.
Thank you very much. My question is related to financing of infrastructure, because usually it's one of the biggest costs of financing, and if you can provide cheap financing, you can do a lot. For example, we created in Austria this ASFINAG model, where we provide cheap financing for infrastructure, and I was invited also to Germany to do this. Could you not also use with cheap financing, which is with state guarantees, but also with central bank financing, also for seaports, for example? Second question, Belt and Road. Here's the problem: the Chinese did a lot of bad investments, and they will lose a lot of money now. And there is now a fight because some countries are over-indebted, and we will not get an IMF program unless the Chinese agree to cut their debt and to have a haircut on the debt with the countries. And this, I think, will be very difficult.
Okay.
And third question, fuels.
quick
Which fuels do you think will be the future?
Okay, and the gentleman behind, he could give also his question.
I would a little bit ask a little bit outside of this normal material management, saying what UAE has announced yesterday, that they are ditching all dollars in case of topics. They are ditching the dollar. A question of inventory management, where you have to finance the inventories during the trip, 2 months or 1 month, etc. And there's always a question when the dollar will not be in the same role, and we have with this colleague a good opening. The dollar, when the dollar has problems.
Well, but
what
this is
will
not
be the
so much what we
financing
discussed today. Yes. Mr. Sunak.
Thank you very much. My name is Rusnak Urban. I'm from Slovakia, dealing with energy security and connectivity. So I would like to ask panelists, those who are dealing with railway transportation, what's your opinion whether Europe shouldn't go a little bit further and to harmonize rules for railway transportation, because we know that they're quite fragmented across the Europe and don't speaking beyond the Europe. So, and it probably is one of the reasons why the railway transportation is lagging behind, despite being sustainable and have all the boxes for the energy and sustainability, but it still is facing a quite upfront fight for broader and more faster transportation through the railway, both the passengers and freights. Thank you very much.
Okay, now who wants to handle the question of financing first?
Port infrastructure is very expensive and requires a lot of financing, not just private but also public financing. Discussion we are having, and it is clear it was cheaper a few years ago or even a year ago. So again, mechanism to support the development of infrastructure. Again, infrastructure was a little bit neglected in the past, and in any case, any support, apart from the Bundesguarantee, but Bundesguarantee is more a risk, it doesn't help in terms of financing. But just taking the example of Ukraine, for example. Ukraine has for a while been a focus area for the German government and the EU also development of Ukraine. But if you wanted to get some financing, risk surcharge here, etc. You were at a financing level which was extremely expensive, which made it very difficult for us to do. Now, that's where, again, coming back to the global gateway, be it in Europe or outside of Europe, and I think there's national programs for within Europe, but outside of Europe, where there is an interest for Europe to be more present, global gateway should have been the answer to that, and would have been a good answer to that. Unfortunately, the way I'm seeing it is it's more declaration of intent than anything concrete. I don't know if you know anything better about that, and it's mostly based on private investment with the support of EBRD, EIB, etc., but at conditions which are not really better than anything else. So while the idea is good, I think the implementation is not really where it should be, and it will hinder the potential development.
And you want to complement?
Yeah, I just would like to add that the Global Gateway is much more about the guarantees than about the investments themselves. And for the countries like Kazakhstan, where they really experience difficulties in getting the national guarantees even for multilateral development institutions like the World Bank, they cannot borrow from the World Bank because they do not agree to provide the guarantee on behalf of the government of Kazakhstan for this loan. This is where the Global Gateway comes with the solutions. Does it work? Not yet, because the level of the awareness is very, very low, and nobody exactly understands how it should work.
On the questions of energy,
I wanted to say something about the Global Gateway. You know,
I always energy hubs also.
No, but you know, for everything, you know, when we speak about the development of port infrastructure today, the biggest part of investment are related to energy, you know?
Yes.
In Northern Europe, but also now in Southern Europe. We are investing 125 million euros. It is financed by the Italian government only for the onshore power supply in the port of Trieste. So, you know, we will have in 3 years all the electrified shores for the ships. So, you know, energy is the real issue. I always say that in the last 3 years, I spoke 70% of my time, or past 70% of my time, dealing with energy issues and not with transport issues is the new issue for the development of ports and the infrastructure. But what I wanted to stress is that Global Gateway, you know, when I speak and I think about Belt and Road Initiative, I'm not thinking about a financial project. It is a vision, and they have a vision. When I meet the Chinese managers, they came, and you know, I don't need money. I can have money from my government, from European, from the banks, from a lot of, you know, sources. The problem is that we don't have ideas. And when I met the Chinese managers, they came with an idea. So the Global Gateway doesn't have the ideas. And they don't have the idea how Europe can be competitive around outside of its borders. This is what Philipp said. It cannot be, you know, I was in Tangier and I closed an agreement with Damietta in November and with Tangier in October. And when I go there, I realize that Global Gateway exists. If I stay in Trieste, I don't know what is Global Gateway. I don't know how can I get the money. I don't know anything. You go outside, you go abroad, and they know Global Gateway. They get money, get funds to be competitive against us with European funds. And you know, this is the paradox, no? So I don't understand what they are doing in the port sector. Public bodies, okay, we are both public, but also the private doesn't know how to get these funds to be competitive outside Europe. So who are the intermediators of the Global Gateway? World Bank, EBRD, and so on, but they don't have any relation with the sector. They have relation with the sector outside Europe. So we are giving money to the people outside Europe to be competitive against Europe. So, you know, what can I say? When I met the Chinese knows very well what they were doing, and there was a vision, and there was a strategy, and also funds, but before there was an idea. What I see in Global Gateway is that there is no idea of creating a competition, a competitiveness of Europe, outside Europe, with European funds. This is what, and I am the president of a European Seaports Organization.
Okay. Yeah. So we had really people with a vision here, a vision of what de-risking the transition to a new globalization means, with critical but encouraging perspective. So thank you very much to all the panelists, and I think we all have deserved a good coffee break, which is until 11:30 approximately. Okay, thank you very much.